So this webinar is like what Navneet said. It is the first one in a series since there is an ongoing discussion on NEP, and traditional knowledge is part of one of the aspects of NEP. We would be doing a series of discussions so that we can formulate something at the end which can be included in our syllabus as much as possible. So formally, I would like to welcome you all to NEP 2020 and Traditional Knowledge in Architecture and Planning, Opportunities and Challenges. First, I will kind of build upon what we understand in this context about traditional knowledge. We can define it as, say, the body of knowledge, science, and techniques used by ancient peoples, passed from generation to generation. Like it is wherever we have old civilizations, people living in a region for quite a long time, we have some knowledge which is being passed on traditionally or locally from generation to generation. So that we more or less understand as traditional knowledge. Modern knowledge, in this context, we are terming as the body of knowledge, science and techniques arising essentially from the European scientific revolution. That is, after Renaissance, the Industrial Revolution, and the logical thinking process and the kind of theories put up by Western scientists, they had a different way of looking at things, which was this: they claimed that it is more rational and the processes are so defined that if anybody does something, you should get the same kind of result. So it was a different kind of approach. So more or less right now what we are learning through is through this modern knowledge paradigm of learning. And if we try to understand this, say with some examples, say for example, if we take the case of India and we think about health. So in that case, if we think about the traditional or classical way of treatment that we already know is Ayurveda, and the modern way of treating is allopathy. Now, there are different ways of treating. They have their own kind of methods, processes, protocols to treat, and the idea is that they would like to treat people and cure people and keep them healthy. In say MBBS, you do not learn about Ayurveda, and when you do Ayurveda, you do not learn about MBBS. But principles may be different, but certain things are would be common. We don't know about that. But what I want to say is that there are two different ways of doing the same thing. Then, if we come to habitation, that is living, say maybe houses, it could be towns, cities, villages, anything. For habitation, you have a traditional way. You had a traditional way of doing things, which was sthapatya, or maybe even some traditional local traditions of settlements. And we have modern architecture. That is what we learn in undergraduate. That is Bachelor of Architecture. For sthapatya or for traditional knowledge, you have different kind of schools, or they can be termed as sthapatis who have their own team, and people learn there through apprenticeship with the sthapati. And it may also they could also be learning through some texts. They have their own texts, and modern architecture we may also be having our own texts. So if we think about traditions, we can kind of say define traditions in, say, it could be kind of vernacular architecture or folk, in which things are taken up, solutions are made, but it is more kind of informal and verbal in nature. Things are being, say, kind of passed on from generation to generation, but the traditions may be vocal or oral. They will not be written down. But they are also used to solve a certain problem of, say, houses, settlement, earthquakes, anything. So we have that kind of a paradigm. Or it could be a classical way of doing things where you have more rigid rules and regulations. You have to follow certain processes and procedures. For example, this visual that you see, they both are in red color, but one is in stone and one is in brick. The one on the left, which is the tall shikhar, it is known as the Sun Temple, actually it may be different also, because the iconography is something else. It's more like iconography of Vishnu on the detail on various panels. It is located in Jhalara Patan in Rajasthan, which is close to say MP. Like if you go from MP towards from say Bhopal to, if you go towards Ajmer, you find this Jhalara Patan somewhere in between. It's a very old town. Like you can see the town plan also. It's a classical 8x8 grade also there. So what I want to say is that in this case, it's a around 10th century temple, maybe slightly plus minus few years. It has a particular style of architecture of that particular region. And on the right is the temple in Siripur in Raipur, close to Raipur in Chhattisgarh. That is made in brick, and they also had their own particular styles of doing things. So these are more kind of classical way of doing things. If we go into more detail of classical, say again we see the same kind of visuals, but the one on the left that you see is a detail maybe on top of a colonnade column structure of a temple. At the top, it's kind of a miniature shikhar with panel with say number of say sculptures below it. There are a lot of kind of damages done, because it's a kind of a piece which is lying on the ground in a place known as Ashapuri, close to Bhopal. It's an archaeological site, and there it is lying down. And the one that you see on the right is from that Sun Temple in Jhalara Patan. So the language is same. You see the details in the same manner, but there are local variations. So the rules or regulations or the kind of parameters that you follow over there might be different. You can compare this with, say, it could be music also. Say certain music styles, more or less you have some kind of Gharana styles. They kind of do the same thing, but in a slightly different manner. So classical is more kind of, say, in a way that you can say it is more rule based. There is scope for variations or experimentation, but there might be some written text which they follow. So if we see the kind of sources of knowledge that we have for traditional architecture, we can classify into a number of ways. Say first is built heritage. Whatever is built, that is a source of knowledge. And within built heritage, we could have archaeological sites. This particular site is of Dholavira in Gujarat. It's a Harappan civilization site. In this site, you can see small houses and streets. And if somebody goes there and studies it, they can find out some information about it. And it would be kind of helpful to them in understanding about the civilization and how did they do their planning. As an aside, what I've not shown here is there are a lot of water tanks all around, and their water management system, like if you see any Harappan site, their water management system is very good. Here also we find that their water management system is very good. And on the right, there are some photographs of pillars made in stone in that particular area, which were found and then kept in a museum. So this is one source of knowledge. In built heritage, you have actual buildings. It could be a monument, a big monument, or it could be a small building, a small structure. The values, maybe say it's just kind of immaterial. You can't judge that a big structure is better or a small structure is not that good. The intrinsic value, each structure should be taken at its own intrinsic values. So this particular building is one of the earliest known freestanding temple structures built of say stone independently. They are not carved out of the one monolith stone, but it is built up of various blocks of stone. It is of the Gupta era, and it is located in the Sanchi Stoop hillock, close to the Sanchi Stoop. It is there. So here there are a number of kind of interesting features that you can see. You can see the style of pillars. You can see that there's a particular sectional detail. You have square at the bottom, then octagon somewhere in between. If you see it, it is square up to this part, then octagonal up to this part, then 16th sided up to this part. Then you have a inverted lotiform shape, and then the bracket the capital base, and then the capital. The capital had lions, which were an emblem of the Guptas. So this way it communicated that this is a Gupta era temple. This kind of pillar also has a name. Like if you read the text, I'll come to that maybe sometime later, but this also has a name. Like you have Doric, Corinthian Ionic columns in say Western architecture, in Greek architecture. Here also you have names, but we are not usually aware of those names of like what are these called. So this is about monuments. Then another source of very interesting source of knowledge is reliefs on monuments. Like you find a lot of sculptures, especially in Buddhist architecture. You find a number of sculptures around in which you can see a lot of interesting details which give you knowledge about the lifestyle of people, as well as the kind of architecture they lived in, the towns they lived in, and what kind of activities did they carry out. A lot of interesting things happening over there. I've taken two such reliefs. They are in the Sanchi Stoop gate, and the one on the left, which is a slightly light colored, you can see like these are scenes actually from the life of Buddha going out of a city. You can see the gates like this over here. This part is a gate, and they are going out of the gate. This part here are the superstructure over the gate. These are big bungalows or houses like Chatushala, Ekshala, Dvishala, Trishala, Chatushala. And these are brickworks. You can see them, they are triangle shaped, kind of a parapet in brick. So one small piece, this is not more than I think 2.5 feet by 2.5 feet. So that small piece of paper, that stone, really gives a tremendous amount of information. You can see people standing on, maybe this could be the third story of a building, third or fourth story of a building. These are the terraces, maybe first or second story, people there and standing there and looking at Buddha. These are the trees, fruit bearing trees. Here you can see a dovecote, that is on a post, there's a bird sitting over here. So I can go on and on, like I find it so interesting that there's a lot of information available here. And in the one on the right, again, you see different types of houses. This is one wing, the second wing, and there's a third wing behind it. Then there are what are known as wagon-shaped roofs. These are made in stone, but actually they were of thatch. The entire structures would be in timber. These are timber posts, then the timber railings. So you get a lot of information about the structural techniques or plans looking at the visuals also. You can actually reconstruct them. If you have some other sources, you can reconstruct these. Then another important source of knowledge is the literary heritage, that is the heritage in the form of literature. Earlier, we talked about the heritage in the form of buildings, sites, details, etc., which was a physical heritage. Here, the next literary source of knowledge is a literary heritage, that is books available to us in which there are descriptions of actual buildings, of towns, of villages. The scope is quite wide. And if we can further classify them, if we can further classify these treatises, there is predominantly known as a Nagara school, that is North Indian school of thought on architecture, and Dravida school, that is the South Indian school of thought. The texts that are available are many. Like in the north, you have Samrangan Sutradhar, then you have Aprajit Pracha, you have Vishwakarma Prakash. In the south, there are many more, like more number of documents are available in the south, like Mayamatam, Mansara, Shilparatna, Manushaya Chandrika. So there's a list of treatises which are available to us even now. Like most of them are kind of fragmented. A lot of them have been translated. Like the one that you saw previously, Mayamatam, this is one of the more complete kind of books which have been translated in English. So there's a lot of information. Like this particular book has Sanskrit text in the left and the English translation in the right. So anybody with a good knowledge of English can understand what's being described. And it's a verse by verse translation. And apart from this, there are descriptions in other texts. Many texts describe, like there is one text known as Marich Samhita, in which it describes a town, and you can actually, it describes a village, and you can see those kind of village plans in south. So there are a lot of other texts, like even Mahabharata describes a lot of palaces and town and say wall making and ramparts and all those things. So there is a lot of information available in these literary texts also. Now, how do actually people study all these things? So these are the availability of knowledge sources. Like you have sites, you have buildings, you have reliefs, you have books. So there's plenty of things available to say people to go through and find out information. Next is, how do people actually study it, or how do they gather information into and process it or research it and then come up with some knowledge or value addition to the information base. So we can say describe these as study domains. The basic or fundamental is survey, site surveys, mostly done by archaeological surveys. It could be the state archaeological survey or the archaeological survey of India. They kind of excavate a lot of sites. This is one recent site being say cleared up in Madhya Pradesh. It is close to Bhopal. It's Ashapuri. There's a huge complex of temples all around. They are kind of in fragments. So the Madhya Pradesh Archaeological Survey, they are kind of documenting it, and then they are trying to reconstruct the entire complex as much as possible. There are huge kind of say mounds of these fragments all over the place. So they do a survey. Like again on this, there can be a complete lecture on this, like what all they have done. It's a complete site. You go there, you find out things. So it's a complete domain in itself. I'm just showing this visual that this is how you can get a lot of information, and you can analyze that and then get something valuable. This is one way of doing it. Next is the theoretical research. Like I showed you, the theoretical works in architecture, the various treatises, and this is my area of interest. It's a kind of a simple thing to be followed. There are descriptions in the Sanskrit text, and then there are translations of that Sanskrit text in English. So this is an example of Mayamatam. So you read those texts and you try to draw what they are saying. So it's not that easy. Like you have to first understand the kind of say some prerequisite things. You have to also see the current the archaeological sites or drawings or images of whatever has been constructed earlier, say over the ages. From that you can get an idea. So it's a kind of a time consuming in building a process, and then in the end you can make a fairly good reconstruction based on what you understand out of those texts. And a lot of information is available. It's like getting some information from X place, then from Y place, then from discussions with certain other people. So after that, you can kind of reconstruct certain things. So this is a pavilion described in Mayamatam. It tells about say Sanskrit. It's in Sanskrit. So if you do not know Sanskrit, like earlier, I did not know a lot about Sanskrit, but I can now understand at least the architectural terms. Like it keeps on repeating, so you know that okay, this Tribhakti means 3 parts. Chaturashram means it's a square or rectangular thing. Shodash means 16. So you get a hang of things and you try to reconstruct that. So based on the text, a rough sketch is made based on the proportion. So you get a fairly good plan that this is how it would look like. You can make a plan and elevation. And then you can also make a 3D out of it. So this is just the plan part. You can see the final reconstruction in a CAD format. You can see the pillars, the brackets, steps. We'll be discussing a few of the examples later on also. This is just to show that this is how what is being done in the theoretical front as a research. Then apart from this, there is the third component, which is comparison of the two and actually finding out whether some built examples actually followed the theories or the components written in text. I've just given one example. There are many other examples also. The most recent one is in the context of Samrangan Sutradhar and the temple near Bhojpur. So a lot of work is being done. This is just one example in which the figure on the left is the elevation of an actual temple constructed, and figure on the right is a elevation of a temple. Again, it's in a sketch form, preliminary kind of a conceptual elevation of a temple as described in Maimatam. So if you scale it down to the same height, you can actually see that you more or less match the proportions of various components. And in the text, these divisions are given. Like it says that if it is a 2-story temple, it has to have 28 parts. The bottom 3 parts is of, say, for the plinth. The next is 6 parts for the level of pillars or the walls, then 3 parts for the entablature, then again 5 parts for the next level of pillars, 2 parts for the entablature, 1 part for the base of the griva or the neck, 2 parts for the neck, and 4.5 parts for the shikhar on top, and 1.5 part of the for the stupi. So those descriptions are given, and on the left you can see the actual elevation of a built example. So this is just one. I just came across one and I tried to compare them, and I found that okay, matches more or less. So likewise, there are hundreds of kind of built examples which are there, kind of open to be, say, looked at from the point of view of theory, and then compared to some text or some description, things like that. So more or less, in my opinion, I believe that these are actually based on text, and you can find, if you compare them, you will get good results with that. This just was an example. So this is the third way of looking at things for the classical way of classical architecture, that is to look into various aspects and then try to compare with the practice. So you have theory as well as you have practice, and the correlation of theory and practice. This is in a nutshell is a kind of a chronology of events that happened. Like it's not the complete list or the comprehensive list, but I have pointed out few of the important people and the kind of work they have done. So this is again from the starting of the modern era. When the Britishers came, they found a lot of these kind of structures all over, and they thought about the antiquity of India, and then they tried to classify it or say study it. So a lot of people who gave their contribution to that. The first one in studies is Ram Ras. He did his study on the Manasara. He studied the text, and based on that text, he made some visuals inspired by that, and also had a few examples in which he shows the actual build examples also. So this is the first one in theoretical studies. Earlier ones were mostly like surveys and documentation, but this is more towards design part or say understanding part or aesthetic part, and trying to understand how things were done. Then you have Ananda Kumaraswamy, who talks about Indian art. Like he did a lot of work in kind of disseminating knowledge about Indian art and architecture and aesthetics to the Western world. They were not open, they were not exposed to the kind of aesthetics we follow, and they had different kind of views, but he played a very important role in kind of exposing the Western world to the kind of subtleties and the nuances and the styles in Indian art, Indian architecture, how did it form and all those things. Some are history books. Then temple architecture, you find a lot of work on temple architecture. Then for sculptural analysis, that is analysis of sculptures in terms of say visual and temporal compositions to understand how certain ideas or thoughts are communicated through temples in various compositions. How did the composition of a given kind of say relief come up, those kind of things. The next important work is by Dr. P.K. Acharya on the translation of Mansar. It is much more comprehensive. I think it is 7 to 8 volumes of work. And D.N. Shukla did it for Samragan Sutradhar. So it's and the latest one is Dr. Adam Hardy is working. He's the only architect in this entire list who has now, he's doing some work on the architecture of, say, he did it for Karnataka Dravida in Karnataka, and also in the central India part of, say, close to Bhopal, in the region of, say, Raisen district, about the architecture of Bhoj, and correlated it with the Samragan Sutradhar. So this is about the important chronology of work. And if we kind of say summarize whatever sources we have of traditional, say, of classical traditional architecture, it's mostly generated by archaeologists. And historians and artists and painters, they refer it. Theoretical research has been carried out by scholars, and architect academicians came in quite late. Like in architectural education, actual architects, they came in quite late when they had plenty of data, and then their interest grew into, okay, we should study this part also. So it is still being done. Like we are the latest entrants into this field of, say, knowledge. That is one part. Next part is how do we correlate with the national education policy. So for that, I am giving a few pointers like of with context to this. That is the NEP 2020 states that they have to that inclusion of traditional knowledge in higher education should be there, and the highlight is on the accurate inclusion of traditional Indian knowledge, including tribal and local knowledge, throughout into the curriculum. So there are, like I earlier said, there are 2 or 3 ways of looking at it. One is the traditional in the form of, say, local vernacular architecture or tribal architecture or the classical architecture. So there is a lot of scope, or there's a lot of things that can be done. Some of the courses or subjects that we say, like we already have some components of the traditional knowledge. When we study about human settlement planning, in that we talked about initial, or say the origin of settlements. In that we talk about towns, local towns, small towns. In history of architecture also we talk about this database, but mostly towards understanding as a history process. And in vernacular architecture, many places this is taken as one of the design exercises. In one semester design, your architecture has to be kind of be influenced, or say be in line with the vernacular architecture of that region, not a copy of that, but inspired by that and in a modern kind of a paradigm. So this list can be increased. These are, and there might be other subjects also which other institutes would be teaching, and they would have some part of their components of traditional architecture. So this is about the kind of, say, knowledge that is present, and how can we include, or how can we include this knowledge into the NEP. So for that, first we need to understand, or we need to find out what is in the architectural treatises. What actually is there? Like if we talk about, say, if we say the term Vastu Shastra, different people get different ideas about Vastu Shastra. And if you ask, say, the common people in the market, Vastu is something that you have to place this in the north, that in the east, those kind of things. So whereas Vastu is not only that, it has a lot more levels of understanding, and there are a lot more levels of, say, components in Vastu Shastras. Say if we take any typical Vastu Shastra, I'll be coming to that. It is a major source or resource for traditional knowledge. And this understanding can be developed by a technique known as content analysis, in which you go through the contents of a book or a film or whatever and try to divide into number of themes and find out what what is it predominantly. Say for example, for a text like any Vastu Shastra like Samrangan Sutradhar or Mayamatam, if you read it, you can broadly understand that these are the themes on which the descriptions are there in these texts. It is about architectural description, that is a description of houses, temples, pavilions, various kind of structures. It could be a description of planning, in which you talk, they discuss about, say, village plans, town plans, forts, palaces, cities, those kind of things. Then there is technical information or data and procedures, like if you want to make prepare wood for construction. So how do you make wood? You have to bring it from the forest, do some curing, those kind of things. Those are given. Even in certain cases, the correct way of making mortar is given. How do you add lime and how do you cure it? For bricks also it is given. So those kind of information is given. Plus, how do you ascertain the quality of soil, whether it is good for construction or not? So some small kind of verses are given, in which they are kind of thumb rules by which you can understand the quality of soil, whether it is good for construction or not good for construction. Then there is some mystic information. Say, I've written it as mystic information. That is because personally we do not know the logic behind that. It just says that these things have to be done, and this would be the result. And if you don't do these kind of things, this would be the result. So it's kind of mystic, like we don't know the logic behind it, or we don't understand that, but it only gives the results of what would happen. Then there are some rituals which we need to follow when we are doing a certain task. And again, like in common term, what is known as good vastu or bad vastu, those things are there. Then there is something about time and astrology. Time means muhurt, which activity should be started when or which activity should not be done when. And astrology is you try to link the kind of, say, the birth or the horoscope of the owner and create a horoscope for the building, and then you try to correlate the land and the owner, so that the land in which he is living or the dwelling that he is going to live in is going to be fruitful to him. So those kind of things are given. And also the honoraria to the architect, that is how much he should be paid or what he should be paid, those kind of things. So these are the broad themes. If you go through a typical kind of treatise on architecture, you will find them. And if you analyze them, this is the kind of result that you would get. If you go verse by verse or chapter by chapter and see the number of verses in a chapter, so you know that the total number of verses or total number of chapters is this, divided into so many chapters. So you can kind of make out, you can kind of do a simple calculation and find out the percentage breakup of various themes. So for Mayamatam, this is the thematic breakup of Mayamatam. There is architectural description of 59%, technical data about 7%, planning description of about 10%, rituals about 11%, good or bad vastu around 7%, then mystic information or social information 5%, honoraria to architect a very small percentage, and time around 1%. So this is what I want to say is that they are not only about the good or bad vastu kind of thing in these treatises, which is more popular nowadays, like in the general public or society, or even in, say, architectural fraternity. If you talk about Vastu Shastra, they come up with this good bad vastu or rituals and kind of these kind of things, whereas it's only, say, 18% of the entire thing. So it's a very small percentage. It is there, but it's not only this. There's a huge kind of database on what we call, what you can say as actual architectural component. And the same is done for, say, Samrangan Sutradhar. Here, the description is, I've taken the same themes, but the variation is there. Here it's 49% planning and architecture, 4% interior design, furniture and decorations. Technical information is around 11%. Mystic information, this is slightly more. Astrology, mythology is again part of it, and art, painting and iconography. So this is a much more kind of vaster kind of a document or a treatise. So, and it is attributed to King Bhoj. So it has more components, more about social customs and all those things. So these are the, again, but you still, if you still see, it's quite, there's still quite a lot of information about architectural related themes. So if you try to say summarize or say conclude into say various finally into two parts, that if you say architectural and non-architectural categories, so it is for Mayamatam it is 1/4 and 3/4. For Samrangan Sutradhar it is say 1/3 and close to 1/3 and 2/3. So there is enough material for interest for architectural studies. Like we can, if we study them, we can get quite a good information about the architecture of that time and how it can be correlated with the architecture of today's time. So initial interview, like this could be the starting point, could be that if you want to include traditional knowledge in contemporary architectural education, what are the commonalities? Like there would be a lot of things which would be common, and how can you dovetail that or kind of streamline into the current way of teaching or doing things. So these are the two main issues when you talk about whether they are harmonious or whether they are contradictory. So these are the things that have to be kind of discussed or seen into before we actually go into any other stage. So this was done, and a study was conducted. Like after going through the complete text, there are a lot of verses which describe what should be the qualities of an architect. There'll be a number of slides on this because a lot of treatises have talked a lot about what should be the quality of an architect. First, say this is in the Samrangan Sutradhar. The architect should know Shastra, that is the theoretical part. He should know the theory, various theories or books or texts of architecture. He should know Karma. Karma is practice of or practical aspect of whatever you are learning. So theory and practice is there. Ganit is maths. Even then, like right now, architects don't feel like doing maths, but believe it or not, it was quite important. Like I still feel it is important, but at that point of time, it was thought important that you should be very good in maths to do the calculations as well as to understand the proportions and the geometry and all those things. So maths was an important component of learning. Chand is the study of proportions. Like in poetry, you have different meters and scales. Chand is actually from poetry. You have different ways of doing poetry, and music has this chand. So in architecture, chand actually means that you should have a knowledge of proportions and aesthetics. So this is about the aesthetics component. Shilp is crafts or doing things. So that knowledge is also important. And yantra kram is a mechanical understanding of mechanical equipment, how things work, or when you are on the site or when you want to make some equipment, say to make water flow, what kind of equipment you would be needing. So study of equipment or yantra. Yantra karm would be like making of various kind of equipment or different types of tools to carry out your works. And then should have pragya. Pragya is intellect and sheel is character. So you have to have intelligence and intellect, and also you should have a good character. So this is just one part. I'll keep on talking about that. There's a lot of interesting information on this. And there are some examples given, like if there's a architect who's good only in theory, but not in practice, he faints at the time of practical work like a coward fainting on seeing the battlefield. Like it's a very good simile. In the modern context, you can say that if you are a fresh architect, you have studied everything and you go to the site, you're facing the contractor and the client and the laborers, and then they ask you something, then if you are not well versed with the practical part, you'll be sweating. Say if you go to a cricket field, in your practice, you have done all the practice of cover drives and everything. But when you go to the field and you see the bowlers and fielders standing all around you, you have to deliver. So if you don't have any practice, you're of no use. And the other part is you have a lot of practical knowledge, but no theory. Then, as per the text, you are like an eyeless man who is helpless and maybe misguided by others. That is, each one would be an expert and he would give you advice that, okay, arey, aap aisa kyun kar rahe ho? Why are you doing it this way? This is the correct way of doing things, because you don't know the correct way of doing things and you're doing it only by experience. So this is an interesting way of putting across like why both theory and practice are important. Then this is another text, Maimbatam, which says that he should know how to establish buildings. He should be well versed in all the sciences. He should be just, compassionate, disinterested, that is unbiased. He should be free from envy, I think, which we should follow nowadays, like in our profession. He should be without weaknesses, and again here also he should be learned in mathematics. So across the country, like if you like, Maimbatam is from Dravida school of thought, and that Samrangan Sutra is from the Nagara school of thought. Both of them feel that mathematics is quite important, apart from other things also. And continuing in that, the architect should know ancient authors. That is, he should have a knowledge of history. He should be straightforward and the master of his senses. He should be able to draw. So drawing is very important, was very important at that point of time. Even now we feel that drawing should be there. He should know the whole country. That is, he should have, apart from the knowledge of authors, he should move around and see actual examples all over the country, how things are being done at various places. He should be generous and not greedy. His health must be good. He should be attentive and free from the 7 vices. And he should have crossed the ocean of architecture, of the science of architecture. So this is the kind of importance they gave to the qualification of an architect before actually any work was given to him. So if we can conclude here is that there is a timelessness in most of the traits of architects which are valid even today. Like if we want an architect today, we look into perhaps at least most of these qualities, that he or she should have these qualities. And there is an alignment of goals in traditional and contemporary scenario. So end product is that they both want good architects. And having these quality, whether it was say around 1,500 years ago, or if it is in the current practice, there is a understanding that this is what we want. So the first opportunity that we got for kind of say taking architectural education towards its roots, or trying to make it more rooted to the place like India. A committee was formed in 2017 by AICT. I was part of that committee, probably because I had like they knew me, who had knowledge about the treatises of architecture. I'm only one of n number of people who have that knowledge, but they knew only me, so that's how I became part of that. Apart from that, Dr. Yogesh Kegar of Merit was there. Then Professor Abhishek Shirodkar of MIT University, Mumbai. Architect Ashutosh Agarwal of New Delhi, he is a practicing architect. And Professor Rajiv Shangi of MNIT, Jaipur. This was the committee which was formed to make a model syllabus for architecture for AICTE. So in that, we included all these parameters of say understand or the rootedness of or the attributes of architects. So the syllabus is available. I've shown the link below. It's in the AICTE site. So the skills or attributes and whatever was expected earlier and whatever is expected in the current scenario, they were kind of tabulated, and more or less it was found that they are kind of matching in many cases. So Visualize in the current scenario, visualization, creativity, sense of design, logical reasoning, all these things come under say pragya or relationship between theory and practice, those kind of things. So, and skills were conceptual skills in which we have these attributes. Then interpersonal skills, that is, should be able to communicate, should be passionate, compassionate, should be physically, mentally, and spiritually fit, will be able to do teamwork. And technical skills, that is, nowadays you would like the person to know a lot of technical information about structures, about software. He should be able to do drawings about the professional rules and regulations, or the legalities, or the legal part of various acts and all those things. So through this table, what we wanted to communicate was that there is a alignment of goals, and additional traits are like should not be greedy, generous, like it's a social kind of a thing. What are the various qualities? So this is the starting, this was one of the starting points. I think AICTE chairman Dr. Anil D. Sahasrabudhe, he might have been at some point of time part of NEP, or he might be part of that discussion before it was formally say opened up, and he therefore perhaps saw that this should also be included in the syllabus. So that is my kind of understanding. I'm not sure, but I've not talked to him, but this is what I understand about that. So coming to now that the start has already been made and we have plenty of data, so there is an opportunity to include a lot of things into the current curriculum. So what we can conclude is that there is plenty of material that can be included in the contemporary education. I have shown only just my work, and there are n number of people like me all over the country and even abroad who are doing and still doing work in their own areas in this maybe traditional vernacular or traditional tribal areas. So there's a lot of information which is already available over here in India for it to be included in the contemporary education. And this is the opportunity. And again, the third one is my understanding or my observation that the paradigm would be modern but enriched with the traditional knowledge. Like we'll be learning as we learn in the current scenario, but there would be an enrichment of that knowledge with the help of traditional knowledge. So now the next thing comes into thought is what can be included, like what is there in these in this which can be included. So we have architectural design, construction techniques, town and village planning, aesthetics. These are just a few topics which can be included. Then at what level? It can be included at say undergraduate level, postgraduate level, doctoral level, even postgraduate level. And how much can be included? Like we are still doing a BR degree. We are not doing a degree for Sthapati or traditional architecture. So how much can be included? That is one point of discussion, like up to what extent can we go? And the time for knowledge assimilation by the learner. So this is again quite an important aspect, because if we give too much information too soon, then it's kind of distorted. It cannot be understood properly. So there has to be proper time gaps between giving this information, or proper, if you want to say in the terms of say medicine, proper dosage. If you give a high dose in a very short time, it's going to give bad results. It's not going to help you. On the contrary, it's going to harm you. So this assimilation component is also important. I'll just go through a few examples of what can be included. Say at a very basic level, we understand mortise and tenon joint. There is a description of this joint in texts. It is known as a mesh shut, and the tenon is known as a shikha. The dimensions of the width and dimensions of the tenon are given. Here, the interesting part is that these are not in the center, they are off center. Otherwise, the components are the same. You have a tenon and you have a base, but it is off center. This is one example. Another is it's a pavilion described in, again, Mayamatam. So as a visual composition, you would feel that, okay, it's a good design, well proportioned, there are a lot of components. So at a preliminary stage, without going into details, you would say you would enjoy the aesthetics without understanding it. So it's like you enjoy music, certain music, but you don't know which rag is it or which mode is it. You don't know that, but still then you enjoy it. So if you don't have anything, it's a simple view, then you are enjoying it. Now there are certain things which are added, like there are components, everything has a name to it. The topmost part or the entablature, that is the roof part, you have Nasika or Nasi, then you have Mandapam, that is the roof, you have corner, Adiquile, these are Chhatri-like structures in the corner, then in the center you have Kosh, and intermediate ones in somewhere in between. The next, at the level of pillars, that is, this was the level of entablature, now it's the level of pillars. You have pillars, wall, windows at that level, and at the level of plinth or the kind of say planar distribution of spaces, you have Bhadra, that is this porch or forepart. This is the Bhadra. Alindra is the walkway, that is very walk, which is covered. Then Sopan is the steps. Then Adhishtan is this base. Jalasthal is, this is actually a water body in the center. So there's a water body and there is a center open to sky court. So, and these are the various components of the base. And this is the complete thing that you see at the end. So there are a lot of things which, if you read the text, will give you information about various components. And if we go to individual of them, like each of these also have their own ratios and proportions. If you go to the study of pillars, again, there are different types of pillars and different types of components in there. Like there is something known as a Brahmakant pillar, a Vishnukant pillar. There are different names of pillars also. And this is the elevation of the same thing. Here, the proportions are also given, like the proportion of, say, the base to the entablature. So usually it is, this is one, this is half or less than, slightly less than half, and this is half of it. So the proportions are given. These divisions or horizontal divisions are also given. What would be these proportions? So you can actually reconstruct these things. So it's kind of a design process, or you can how to decide on grades and how to decide on proportions, rather than just studying the history part. So there would be n number of examples, like things which have to be kind of looked into and kind of delved out of the text as well as from the various sites. And you have to create study material in different media. It could be in the form of print, that is books. It could be in the form of digital media. You have interactive videos. You have simply video lectures. It could be multimedia, different things. It could be interactive, something known as serious games, like in which you can actually design certain things based on certain parameters. You can keep on designing, like it's like a game, but more like you're learning something out of it. And also you can make some scaled models with that. So these models will also help. So this is an opportunity as well as a challenge to do. Then how do we kind of input it into the curricula? One way is that you add various information into respective courses or respective subjects. One which is related to construction, you include that, say, joinery in the traditional time was this. So when you learn joinery today in this construction 2 or construction 3, you have that part of it. You teach the same thing, but also tell that this is also known as this kind of name. That's it. Then it could be an elective. It could be an online course of 1 semester. So like now, a lot of students are taking online courses which are added to their credits. So they don't have to kind of be there. They can do that online course and earn credits. It could be in the form of conferences where people gather together on one aspect of the study, and then at the end of it, you'll get a proceedings which can be a teaching material, or it could be a workshop. in which you actually do hands-on things and then document it and then have a study material. Or it could be a short-term course. So there are a number of ways by which we can address this in various forms. Like you want to have short-term courses, you could have conferences, all those kind of things. But now here lies the crux. Like to do this, we need teamwork. And the skills that would be needed to do it, like you'll have to have somebody who has a fairly good knowledge of Indian system of architecture, somebody who would have a fairly good knowledge of contemporary architecture, somebody who's good in drawing, somebody who's good in writing, somebody who's good in digital communication. He can make a lot of things, or who's good in CAD, can do a lot of software and make things in CAD in a very kind of say good way, make it presentable, make it interactive. And these resource persons could be students, could be academicians, could be professionals. So a single person cannot have all these qualities. Like so, a teamwork has to be kind of made so that at the end of it we get something which is more productive and fruitful. So this is again one of the challenges that we have to deal with. So as conclusion, or in the concluding part, what I would like to summarize as that there is information available, plenty of information is available. We have to prioritize how do we get that information into the current scenario of architectural education. We have to prioritize, like we can take easier ones in the beginning, which are much easier to understand and much easy to create, rather than waiting for the time when everything is done and then we'll include that. That would take a lot of time. So we can start with simple things and make it a process, step-by-step process. Have some short-term goals, long-term, medium-term goals, and long-term goals, and then develop them to suit our needs. Like needs of say academicians, like your faculty members who would like to have a certain kind of format, and students who would like to have a different kind of format. So you have to develop them in the form of our needs. And third is, then the next is you have to disseminate them. Dissemination is again with whatever formats that we can have. So finally, I would like to convey my thanks or my gratitude to my guru, my guide for PhD and since quite a long time, Professor S.D. Chaya of Vadodara, and also Akash Trust Pondicherry for their encouragement and guidance and kindling my interest in this topic. This is only for this particular, apart from them, there are a lot of people who have helped me out financially as well as in different way. But for in creating my, or say kindling my interest in this topic and encouraging me, these are the two institutions, one institution, one person who was key in doing that. I would like to convey my gratitude for them. With this, I would like to thank you all.
Thank you, sir.